Welcome back to all of you, and welcome to those who have just joined us. We are live from VivaTech Stage 3, and today we are talking for our third session about tech in mind. Now, to join us for this special, very exciting session on brain tech, I'd like to welcome Stanley Durrleman, researcher at Inria and ICM in Paris Brain Institute. Welcome.
Thank you.
And Ana Maiques, CEO of Neuroelectrics. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Thank you for being with us here today, both of you. And we're also joined remotely by Newton Howard, researcher and former director of MIT's Mind Machine project. Welcome to you all. Hello, Newton.
Hi.
Great to hear you. Thank you very much for being with us here today live at VivaTech for this session on Tech in Mind. Now, just before we start, I would like to remind our audience here and for those watching online that you can ask questions. We will have time for a little questions and answer session at the end. So please don't hesitate in asking any of the questions for our guests who are taking part in this session. And let's get started. My first question is for you, Stanley. Now, you're a researcher at the Inria and ICM at Paris Brain Institute. Could you tell us more about the work that you do on the brain? Now, I know we have a video for this as well.
Yes, thank you. So what I do is to build computer model of brain aging. So what we'll see in the video is a computer model that shows you all the changes that occur in your brain while time goes. And by time here, I mean years or decades. And you know that you lost neurons during aging, so you see that some tissues are deforming and that you lost the thickness of your cortex or different things like that. On the top right, you can see the glucose metabolism, which means that your brain consumes less and less glucose as you age, basically. And all that is synchronized with the progressive onset of some impairments. Like you lost some cognitive functions, so your memory is not so good. Your spatial orientation might be not so good as it used to be.
Fantastic. So what kind of disease are you currently working on that could potentially revolutionize the way we find treatments? I mean, we're talking about neurological disorders and diseases, for example.
Yes, so what you have seen here actually is not just an average brain or something in theory. That's something that occurs for a real patient, and a patient who is developing Alzheimer's disease. So what we have seen is that the very subtle changes that you see in different brain regions actually is the sign of a disease that is ongoing.
Right.
So what we can do is so when you have a new patient that comes, we can take some measurements of this patient. You can MRI scan. We can make some, what we say, neuropsychological assessment to assess your memory, to assess your orientation skills, and so on. And given all this data, what we can do is to personalize this model. So now this model is yours. It's like a digital twin of your own brain. And we can see now, project in the future, the changes that will occur in the next years or decades. And that is extremely important. Because now we can say, is it the right time to start an intervention for this brain? Is it too early? Is it too late? We know that if we treat this disease too late, it's usually too late and we cannot recover the function that has been lost. And with that type of tools, we think we can anticipate the moment we can treat.
Right, but you will start obviously using these tools when people get the first onset or first symptoms of any neurological disorders, right?
Yes, absolutely. And then you can measure the effectiveness, the efficacy of a treatment. So if we start a treatment now, so we know how your brain will go without it, and we see how much it can reroute, if you will, the trajectory of your brain to go in a safer path. So we can, for each patient, we can provide a patient-level outcome of the intervention. And that I think is quite unique.
Now, you mentioned that Alzheimer's and Parkinson's are the two main diseases that you work on. I mean, since you started work in on these neurological diseases, how have you seen the progression in the medical field in your...
So it's a good question because this month, the FDA in the US approved the first drug against Alzheimer's disease in the last 20 years. So it's a very big news, of course. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of controversy around this, so I won't go into the details, but just in a simply put, what I think we need urgently here is to carefully delineate the risk and the benefit for the patients. So for whom the drug will be the most beneficial, for which risk. And I think that what we have shown here is a way we can say, well, for this patient, it's the right time and the right person to start treatment. And for that one, maybe it not be the right time. And so I think we need more technology and with more innovation to make very medicine that are targeted to each individual.
Personalized medicine.
Absolutely.
As we spoke earlier to Aurélie about, the brain is obviously a very complex organ. I mean, how much of it do we understand today?
So it's hard to say. I think we understand more and more, definitely, but there's even more to discover. And we used to say that the brain is the terra incognita of the 21st century, and I think I see Anna probably will agree with me and all the players here. I think there are two challenges that we face today. So I think at the fundamental level, we know more and more how the brain works, from the molecular up to the cognition. But what is still very difficult to understand is why one brain is so different from another one. Your brain, my brain are completely different. You do things that I can't do, and vice versa. And of course, there is training, there is education, but what is also on the biology beyond that? And the second challenge is, well, is again the aging problem. So brain at one point, okay, we can start understanding how it works, but why the brain is changing so much over time? How can we preserve some of the function and to have the most healthier aging as possible? That's, I think, is a key challenge for the next years to come.
Now, in a session earlier on today, we spoke about AI and the relevance of AI in progressing in medicine. Is it something that you use at the moment, or what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. I mean, the model that I've shown you is a result of algorithm that you have designed.
Right.
So what we did is to take thousands of patients' data that has been tracked over a certain period of time, and we have trained algorithms to learn, okay, what are the typical trajectories of brain aging? It's like a bit of a flight map, if you wish.
Of course.
You see all the routes of all the flights going, and if you know that, then if you have a plane that you say, well, now is above Iceland, and at this altitude, then you can guess this plane will probably land in New York or Boston in some hours, And it's exactly the same thing. So now I trace or chart all the routes possible for the brain. If I have someone coming to the clinic and say, oh, the data is there, so I know its position, and I can predict how this patient will progress in time.
Do you think that AI will help find solutions and cures to a lot of the diseases that you work on in the future?
So surely AI will help, certainly not alone. I mean, it's a combination of very different expertise that we need to bring together. So AI and technology is certainly a way we can do that, because what I've shown that if you ask a neurologist today, okay, what this patient will be in 3 years, I mean, it's very extremely hard for him to say. And so we can bring here a new piece. But of course, it's just a piece of a much bigger picture. And of course, we need to work on the biology. We need to better understand the biological mechanism underpinning all these diseases. So yeah, there is room for improvement in all areas.
Of course, thank you. Now, Newton, you are the former director of MIT's Mind Machine project, and you made significant innovations in modeling the activity of the human brain. Now, what is your take on that? What is your take on what Stanley said?
Stanley's approach is definitely, I mean, to say the least, is brilliant, because when you do an intervention for Parkinson and Alzheimer, time is a very important variable. When you actually decide to do the intervention by a pharmaceutical agent versus intervention by a surgical solution, it's quite important to be guided by some kind of directional view or preview of things over time. In my approach, I basically work with reconciling 3 domains in the brain: the structural, the functional, and the behavioral, to understand precisely where is the localized area that requires that intervention, and then work on a surgical placement for it.
Now over to you, Anna. You are the CEO of Neuroelectrics, which is a new therapeutic platform to treat neurological and psychiatric disorders. Firstly, just roughly tell us about what you're actually working on, and what your role is in the company and what you're developing.
Yes, so great. It's great to be here. I had the pleasure of sharing a stage yesterday with President Macron, and I didn't manage to put my technology on him, but at least he could see it firsthand. So, yeah. So I'm the CEO and founder of Neuroelectrics, a company that is developed a new generation. Oh my God, now it crashed. A new generation of non-invasive brain stimulation device. So this device that I'm wearing right now can do two things. It can record your brain activity. I will pull it up in a moment. It can record your brain activity through these electrodes, and then it can inject currents into the brain. Any of these electrodes I'm wearing can inject currents into the brain. So what is this useful for? Well, for different things. We do believe this can become a new therapy, and as Stanley was saying, the brain is very complex, right? But the concept of electricity to heal the brain has been happening since the Roman times. Romans used to take ray fish and put it on their heads to deal with pain. Can you believe it? So it's not a new concept. So we do believe that non-invasive neuromodulation can help patients with epilepsy, with depression and Alzheimer's. And in fact, as a European entrepreneur, I moved to Boston 5 years ago, where we are leading an FDA trial with Boston Children's for epilepsy, and we are showing that non-invasively we can reduce seizures in children that don't respond to medication.
Wow.
We got breakthrough designation by the FDA last week, so we think we are going to become the first company to really push through the FDA this technology as a new therapy that doesn't exist today.
Fantastic, congratulations. Can you give us a demonstration? I know you've been trying to connect it with your computer. Have you managed to succeed?
I will in a few moments, so we can keep on talking.
So just tell us about what Macron, you met President Macron yesterday. You didn't succeed in putting it on his head, strangely enough. But what did he have to say about it?
I think he was, I really praise the commitment of President Macron to the startup community. I haven't seen any other world leader speaking up so clearly and so passionately about the startups and the need to scale them up. So I praise him from that. He was very passionate about healthcare. He had a strong point about how the top-down approach of the French government in healthcare can protect, for example, brain data, right? So devices like mine that are supposed to be used at home, who is going to control that data, right? Once it becomes, a medical therapy. So he had strong points on how good the French government can protect patients, and he was very passionate in general about healthcare. So that's great.
Newton, what are your thoughts on non-invasive neurological care?
So the classes of BCI is broken into obviously the invasive class like DBS, the brain stimulation, and the brain wearable high-level interface that intervene at the upper sensory areas and whatnot. There is nothing more pristine and accurate in correction than anything that can penetrate to layer 5, 6 of the brain. Everything else can possibly reduce some of the difficulty or the challenges with the disorder, but will not reach a level of accuracy that you can achieve with things like deep brain stimulation class, for example. The solution that does EEG and simultaneous TDCS, transcranial electroconscious stimulation, it also requires a level of precision and directionality and a whole slew of things that requires to actually come in the requirement. But it is a good interim solution toward the direction of electroceutical intervention, which moves us away from the pharmaceutical class that showed very poor records in the last 50 years or so.
And that actually said that maybe a lot of children aren't necessarily taking medication. You did mention that it's a good solution for those that can't necessarily do that, right?
Precisely. I do believe drugs are a good solution for certain brain diseases, but as we have said, Alzheimer's, mental health, right? Even in epilepsy, out of the 60 million in the world, 1/3 don't respond to medication. And the alternative is surgery, right? It's everything about implanting electrodes.
Yeah.
So I think that there is an opportunity, right, for innovation in healthcare, to cover those patients that don't respond to medication or where medication hasn't been able to provide a solution. And to respond to Newton, we are building at Stanley 3D models of the brain, neurotwins, we call it. We have an ERC grant with IMCERN for more than 10 million euros to really advance on this personalization of brain models. So it's more on the AI topic of this table, is more about personalizing per brain and per pathology. And it's complex, but I think technology will get there.
So what is your take, Stanley, on this non-invasive solution, how would I say, to any kind of neurological disorders?
Yeah, that's certainly very promising therapies. And as they said, I can only concur with that, is that there is no one drug for all patients, and we need many drugs for drugs and therapies, surgeries, non-invasive therapies, drugs, all that combined. And so the challenge now is to say, well, given this patient, what will be the outcome? What is the best treatment option for this patient? And that is what is the most challenging now, because, of course, we cannot undergo all possible therapies on every patient. So Newton, for instance, mentioned deep brain stimulation that was actually invented in France, in Grenoble.
And you sound very proud.
No, I was not involved at all in that. But actually, in the Salpêtrière Hospital where I work, we have a track record of a deep brain stimulation patient for decades now. And that's extremely interesting because the outcome of the surgery is quite different according to different patients. And that's been quite a mystery to know, okay, why does this work so well for some patients and not so well for others? And you asked me the question about AI, and typically what we are doing now is to take all these records to see what was the profile of the patient before the surgery and see the outcome and try to predict which type of patients are good responders for deep brain stimulation. And it's clear indication that if during Parkinson's disease you also onset more cognitive symptoms, your likelihood to have a good outcome for this surgery is lower than if you have not. So, and that's just a very high-level indication. I think we need to work much harder to fine-tune than the characterization of the patient to be able to be much more precise on the prediction of the outcome.
So you think as a therapy, it maybe just has to kind of be a bit more developed? There's room for development?
Yes, especially in the indication. Who you treat, when you treat.
Okay, so you're ready, Anna?
I am.
You're going to give us a demonstration?
Yes.
Good, we'll take it away.
Yes, sorry about that. So as you're listening to me, I mean, your brain communicates both electrically and chemically. So what you see now on the screen is a real image of
This is your brain?
This is my brain right now. This is my electrical sort of activity. It's called Eeg Electroencephalography. And you'll get a test like this if you're suffering from either sleep disorders or epilepsy, right, as an example. So this is my brain in real time. This is what we call an spectrogram, right? I think what it's really powerful about seeing my brain in real time is that once we know, for example, where your seizure in epilepsy is coming from, what we can develop it's this, which is a personalized, look at this, I can have up to 32 electrodes, wait a moment, and I can decide how many electrodes, in this case, for example, are injecting current into my brain to either excite or inhibit a particular area of the brain, right? It's not very precise as deep brain stimulation, but you can think that maybe the seizure is coming from this area, the motor cortex, right? And I'm going to try to inhibit, to reduce the activity of the brain through electricity, right? To reduce seizures. In other pathologies, such as Alzheimer's, we may want to excite that area of the brain. And I think there are a lot of questions, right? Like Stanley was saying, how is your brain different from mine, right? We take an MRI of a patient and then we build a 3D model of your brain because of your scalp and so on. So I think that this is just an example, that was my demo, of how, in real time, you can really be home, your doctor can access your brain data and really personalize treatments, right? So it's portable, it's wearable, you can be home, but it's still a medical device under physician subscription.
So the first step is localizing the area that you want to treat, right?
Correct.
And this is, what is the name of the?
It's called StarStim.
StarStream.
StarStim stimulation, right?
Okay, right. So it's the first thing first step is localizing, and then it's with the help of the electrodes, it's stimulating. Right. Okay. And have you run tests on it so far? I mean, where are you with the
So we are still in clinical development, meaning that we are in 2 FDA trials. One is a pivotal trial, 200 patients in 25 US hospitals.
Right. Okay.
And it's for epilepsy patients that are refractory. And the other is a fully at-home, because of the pandemic. The FDA allow us to send cabs to American citizens at home. So it's all at-home depression study. It's a pilot, and based on the data, we will move it into the pivotal phase. So it's in clinical development.
Okay, so Anna, just go right back to the beginning. I mean, before the first stages of developing this cap. I mean, why did you decide to do it? Why did you decide to do it?
Well, my co-founder is a physicist and a mathematician, so we were always very obsessed about understanding the brain from a kind of physics perspective and math as an electrical part of our body. So we've been doing research with a lot of support from the European Union on the brain for the last 10 years. And it's through this trying to understand the brain that we came with this technology, and we thought this could have an impact on patients. So we keep on doing research, but I think we bring a new view into the therapeutic lines of CNS.
We've come to the perfect place to showcase your cap. What about the future of neurological technology and advances? I mean, how do you see it developing with the aid of AI, for example?
Well, a lot of colleagues of mine, entrepreneurs, are moving into, for example, digital health, right? Digital health can be anything like video games to cure ADHD, like my colleagues at Achille, or pair therapeutics, which is doing a combination of drugs and software. So I think that there is a lot of interventions in the brain that are going beyond the pill, right? Still, we need to go through the regulatory process and demonstrate efficacy, right? But I think it's super interesting how a lot of digital health innovators are really bringing different solutions, right, which are not necessarily only a pill.
Okay, can you just name a few disorders or diseases that this could potentially help? You mentioned Alzheimer's.
Yeah, I mean, there are some diseases like Parkinson's where I don't think we are going to have any impact because the nodes of the disease are in very profound areas. So our technology has certain limitations, right? So I think we can have an impact, of course, in things like epilepsy, depression, and neurodegeneration, dementia, Alzheimer's.
Okay, Stanley, is this something that we'll be using anytime soon in your clinics?
I hope so. As soon as it's available, I'm sure. And then I would like to have it, but to monitor the patient over time. So not just a one shot on one time, or not even every 6 months or a year, but to monitor. And I think this type of device, and you mentioned digital health as well, has a potential to monitor patients at much more frequent pace. And so the challenge, I think, therefore, innovation is how can we aggregate all these data sources in the same place to be analyzed jointly, because so we can take an MRI in the clinic, then I can go home and I have some digital test, or I can do serious games, as you mentioned. I can then at some point put the helmet on my head and do some things, some training, and capture some measurements. Then the challenge is, well, all these live in completely different environments. And we need to have all this information to make accurate prediction about the patient. So, and you mentioned President Macron, so actually we need to find a way to gather all this data in a privacy-preserving way, which is, I think, a real challenge, but the next challenge we need to solve to unlock innovation in this domain.
Newton, now we mentioned Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. Now, and of course, using AI in finding solutions. Now, you recently disclosed breakthrough AI technology for treating Parkinson's and Alzheimer's at the Dubai's Artificial Intelligence Summit. What can you tell us about that?
Well, essentially, what we disclosed is a chip that we've been working on even from my time in France, which is referred to as the Kiwi chip. It's a deep brain stimulation from the ground up, low power, AI-driven chip that is the shape of a spherical upload kiwi. approximately 1.2 by 2.2 millimeter, and has the capability of interfacing at micron level interface with actual neuron and do the pristine level stimulation up to the deepest layer in the cortex. We've been working on it for over 15 years. It's a combination of several developments, to include looking at TMS, TDCS, data from actual DPS, over 900 patients, using LFP and standard pulse generators. And then learning from all these different tools, what is it that we really need to fix, for good, the whole problem with some of this.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry, we missed you there. What did you just say there? We just missed the really important bit. Go on, what were you saying? What are you missing?
Oh,
cut out, sorry.
I said we're hoping to basically achieve a therapeutic results that go beyond what DPS, as it stands right now, was capable to provide. And I think we have made some good progress in that respect.
So what can you tell us about the importance of integrating AI in, finding solutions to neurological disorders and such like? How important is it? Have you been faced with any obstacles along the way by more sort of traditional researchers? What would you say is the hardest thing to kind of convince people when you're utilizing this kind of technology?
Well, the brain is always looked at as from a theory of localization or from a theory of issues on the structural and the functional reprogramming of a particular area. Generalists, but in fact, it goes beyond that to be something that can also process optical. If you can have the photoreceptivity available in these things like the Baskin cell and whatnot, which is implicated in a lot of neurological disorders. And once you have the capability of reprogramming a particular area in the brain and reestablish a functional dominance over some of the functions that are lost, all these are challenges that gone on for the last 15 to 20 years. When optogenetics first came out, it wasn't an easy thing to accept. When you assume that you can actually process spike train, duration, intensity, and time intervals and whatnot, doing theories and trying to understand what does that mean. These are all difficult questions that faces a challenge among the community of AI, the practitioners, the medical field, the acceptance to include the FDA, how does this approval process and what do you look for to approve it and so forth.
So, on a global scale, what are the benefits, of course, of this innovation? And would it make treatments more accessible and affordable overall?
I think we broke down the cost of treatment from something that costs tens of thousands in the case of the class of DPS, deep brain stimulation category, and surgical stimulation, to something that is affordable by everyone. We are able to tackle a large number of the neurodegenerative spectrum as opposed to one or two disorders at a time. And we're still going and growing and actually making these improvements more prominent features of the solution.
Stanley, is Newton's work something you're familiar with and the breakthrough that he's just mentioned?
I'm not exactly familiar with what Newton is specific area. Yeah, but definitely we are working also on non-invasive and surgical intervention for the same neurological disorders. Coming back to your question about the affordability of these treatments, it's I think a very timely and relevant question. So coming back to the news of this new drug approved for Alzheimer's disease, it's supposed to cost something like $56,000 per year per patient. And
right.
If you add all the medical times that you need to treat the patient, you can double this number. So which means that not everybody could afford such a treatment, which raises, of course, important questions for the medical insurance field, especially. And yeah, then it comes back to the question. So we should use such treatment very wisely. First, because there is a benefit to risk ratio to assess very carefully. And also because there is a cost for the patient and the society as a whole. So again, it comes back to the question to not all treatment works for everybody, and so we need again to decide, to make a very wise decision on which one we will treat and which one we don't treat, and to have very strong evidence of this decision. And it's very complicated. So, and we are working now with health economists. You mentioned the pluridisciplinary work, so we work also with biologists, neurologists, and computer science, AI. But we need to bring into the loop also health economics people and people working on ethics. Because when you say to a patient, well, I don't think this treatment is for you, it's very difficult to understand. And so we need to have a very strong proof that for this person at that moment, that might not be the best option. And that's completely changed the way it functions between the patient and the doctors.
So cost is obviously a huge issue in any kind of medical or pharmaceutical care and solutions. Is this a more cost-effective solution? I mean, I'm not going to ask you necessarily to give us a price, but is this a more cost-effective solution to maybe a medication alternative?
Yes, I mean, this device today we are putting in the hands of researchers worldwide for, between $10,000 and $20,000, right, depending on the features. But I think that when we go home, this is going to be a subscription-based therapy. So you will charge, the patient per month, and it's going to be really affordable to all. I think that the other point that Stanley and Newton made me think about is I've been involved in a number of neuroethics discussions, right, especially in the US. And I think it's a key topic when you're an entrepreneur or you're working on neurotech, right? Because I think that the level of interaction and the window we have in the brain is unprecedented, right? So there's people like Elon Musk, right, which are developing implanted devices to do brain-computer interfaces, right? There's people like me doing medical tech, but at the end, we all are going to have a privileged access to the brain, right? So who is watching over issues like identity, right? Autonomy, right? Affordability. I think we need to be careful with how we develop these technologies, right? Because what it means to be human is totally linked to your brain. So, if you're going to change what it means to be human by technology, you have to protect the consumer, right? So I think it's going to be exciting times for neurotech, and especially on the ethical issues. I'm super curious to see how the medical and consumer world are going to really deal with this really, really long-term important impact of the technologies that we are developing today.
Now, Newton, back to you. Anna very interestingly mentioned Mr. Musk and his project of putting a chip in the brain. What's your take on that?
Oh, it's very interesting. He's interested in putting something on the surface of the cortex. I don't think it's Mr. Musk that is capable of doing that. I think it's some of the good qualified engineers and doctors that he has in his team. Their approach needs a lot of work to actually be validated and be effective and therapeutic beyond propaganda.
Stanley, I'm getting the impression you're of the same opinion.
Yeah, I have mixed feeling about this. I think we need to be careful in where we put the effort and the resources. I mean, research in general is very resource demanding. We need a very high-skilled person. We need a lot of materials. And so we need to choose what to do with that. So, okay, we can decide to plug a USB stick in the brain, which might be an option. Very unlikely to work, maybe, but sometimes it works. So we don't know. I think my take home is that, okay, we have the brain that we have. I think it's the most beautiful piece that nature has ever produced. It's super small. It consumes extremely low amount of energy compared to what all what humans do, and can do things that no human machine can do better than we are. So, okay, this is a marvelous piece of biology that we have in our brain, and we need to keep that. You need to train it. You need to use it as wisely as possible. You need to make sure it will age in a healthy fashion. But preventing diseases, trying to recover neurological disorders, trying to have effective training stimulation, that I think is a better effort to make that our brain healthy for a long time.
But just going back to your contraption, I mean, this isn't a cure. This is a therapy, right? I'm just really kind of like reiterating the fact that this isn't a solution to people that have any neurological diseases. It's a way of therapy. Am I right?
It is correct, but I have colleagues of mine in the entrepreneur world that decided to go consumer, right? So there was a company that they shut down in the Silicon Valley, but they were using a similar technology to enhance performance in sports, right? Mm-hmm. Or to try to make you learn faster, right? So, you know, the question is, can you use these technologies to enhance the human brain and make you smarter and, you know, better? And that's a different approach, right? I have decided to go medical because honestly, I'm not going to dedicate my life and effort as an entrepreneur to have some kiddos play video games and have more fun, right? So, but I think that you will see more and more consumer companies coming with neurotech technologies into the market. So it's a reality. And they will make some false or maybe some true claims on whether they can make you smarter and better.
Okay, so Anna, in an ideal world, how would you like to see this develop? You know, it's FDA approved, for example, and how would you like in the long term? How would you like to see this develop, not just, you know, commercially, but like kind of and the technology? How would you like to potentially, maybe, do you think this could provide a cure if you work on different means of efficiency?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's early to know. We know we can provide short-term therapy for certain diseases. I think that my dream is by deploying this new therapy into the homes of millions of patients, what we can do through AI and other technologies is learn more about the brain, right? Stimulate brains at home for people that need it today, record brain activity and try to really learn more how the brain works, how to personalize therapy. So maybe 10 years, 15 years from now, we may understand better the brain and make our therapies much more effective, right? So it's a short-term goal of helping patients today with a long-term goal of trying to understand better the brain and help more patients in need.
Thank you very much for that. Now I'm going to welcome to the stage Guillaume Gralet, who is going to be taking us again on one of his tech trips. Hello, Guillaume. So you're going to take us on a tech trip today.
Yeah, very good news, guys. You know, summer is coming. So if you decide to stay in Paris next week, you may want to walk along the Seine, sip a glass of wine in a cafe, or pose for a portrait in Montmartre, or try to get in touch with a group of 15 passionate people, a team of neuroscientists, designers, hardware developers that are working on creating a telepathic link between humans and technology.
Wow.
Their name, NextMind. So the Parisian startup was founded by Sid Quider, and his dream is to control an avatar in virtual reality with the help of a thought-sensing wearable that gives users the ability to control devices with their mind in real time. We are in Minority Report. How does it work, you may wonder, Hailey? This technology uses non-invasive brain sensors alongside machine learning to translate brain signals into digital commands, making it easier for users to interact with computer and AR, VR headsets. NextMind had the support of a few investors like Sune Alstrup Johansson. He's the founder of the A Tribe, a startup that has been acquired by Oculus and Facebook.
Facebook?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this is one of Mark Zuckerberg's long-term goals, to reinvent the way we communicate with machines. In 2018 at F8, you know, the developer conference, the social media company holds every April, Zuckerberg and Regina Dugan, you know, the former head of DARPA, presented a new type of technology meant to translate a person's thoughts directly from their brain onto a computer screen. The project was led by the secret group called Building 8 that led to the acquisition of Control Labs. So we see some images of Control Labs on the screen, and the idea here is to anticipate someone's intention with a move of his hand. Just as some currently available headsets like the Muse model can help with meditation, in the future, these kind of interfaces will be helping to create miracles like helping a quadriplegic man use his hands, enable a paralyzed woman to walk, or allow someone who is nonverbal to communicate verbally.
Wow.
And of course, you spoke about that just earlier, there are more invasive technologies, like think was stentrod, that could fight paralysis, but would require surgery and would be implanted via the patient's blood vessels. Just received breakthrough status from the FDA, which means they will pass an accelerated regulatory review process.
But that can also be dangerous, right?
That can be super dangerous. You're totally right. Consider the company Battle. You know, 2 years ago, the company was awarded a contract from the DARPA for working on a bidirectional brain control technology interfaces for soldiers to use in battle, called brainstorms for brain system to transmit or receive magneto-electric signals. The technology makes it possible to transmit commands stemming from neural activity to an external transceiver. But the technology's greatest impact may prove to be on democracy itself, if you see maybe in 20 or 30 years' time. I don't want to be scary, guys. Should this happen, these devices will have unprecedented access to the human mind and even on individual thoughts themselves. Remember what happened at the San Bernardo shootings in 2015. The FBI had a warrant to enter the deceased suspect's iPhone, but no method of entry, as they had no passcode. For security reasons, Apple has intentionally opted not to develop an option for a backdoor into its devices. They are designed to wipe the data on the device after 10 failed logged attempts. But with a headset that can read your intentions, no more code will be needed. It begs the question, just a question, what would happen if those thoughts were being used as testimony in a legal case? Would a person's intentions, be they good or bad, say unintentionally causing harm in an attempt to help versus deliberately inflicting harm, be judged as the act itself? I mean, the intention could be judged at the act. This sort of data could eventually be a window into the mind, but also the potential to infringe upon someone's Fifth Amendment protection. And there are some works I encourage you to read, guys. The work from researchers from the American University Washington College of Law, and that just said something very interesting, I think. Said, we need to create some new privacy rules for the 21st century that catch up to technology's new ability to access not just to our bodies, but our minds. Well, that gives us some food for thought if we are going to walk along the Seine next week.
After our glass of wine, thank you very much. That is mind-blowing. It's kind of like the Minority Report with Tom Cruise. So thank you very much, Guillaume, for opening up these perspectives of these new frontiers, even if this does seem extremely futuristic. What was your take on what he says? Do you think it's realistic?
Realistic, it's a good question. I don't know. It's inspirational, at least, that's for sure, and project us in a far-fetched future. I mean, you tackle so many topics in your 5-minute talk that I don't know where to start. Maybe one distinction we can make is between medicine and I would say, wellness. That are very two different types of innovation. So medicine is a much more regulated area, and when you claim that you can do something, you need to prove it. And we have seen that for the vaccine. Just not enough to say, well, I have a vaccine and my daughter take it. It's not enough. So you have to prove and to make clinical trials, and that's, again, a lot of things to do. So just to mention, some of the innovation can come quite early because maybe they don't tackle a medical problem or have a medical claim, but others will take probably much longer to come on our hands.
The main difference between augmentation and reparation, right?
Yeah, I don't know where augmentation fits in this landscape. You can think of, you mentioned some medical application of it for a person that lost some functions. So might be a medical device at the end. Might be something more funny for the sake of fun, but that's a completely different story.
Thank you very much, Guillaume. Now it's time for our question and answer session. Okay, so I have a few questions. Actually, I have a lot of questions in. My first question is for you, Newton. Are you afraid of the misuse of tech when it comes to the mind?
Certainly, this device, the iPhone, is our first revolution, if you will, in human augmentation. It sits outside of the cortex. It interacts with your peripherals, and it achieved the same objective of augmentation by different means. It's engineered ergonomically to work with everybody. It could be used for good or for bad. The technologies that Guillaume talked about, we worked on in the late 90s in the military for preventing fratricide or friendly fire. And the theoretical framework was referred to as the framework for intention awareness. Later on, it was mapped and extended to understanding intention as it relates and as it's forged on the substrate layer of the brain, the biological brain as we know it. So it was used to prevent friendly fire. It was used to prevent hostile intent. It was used to isolate bad actors from data. And its use in today's brain-computer interfaces and DPS and whatnot, it is not a science fiction. It is in fact something that works in some capacity and in some form today, and can be purposed for clinical or augmentation or games industry, or Facebook desire to communicate with the machine when they fail to communicate among human. But it's all depend on which direction that you take it and which way you purpose it. It introduced the concept of a necessity for neuroethics and policies to regulate these classes of technology as they come wide use and gain wide acceptance. Privacy issues are definitely coming to the forefront of being questioned, and some of the flaws or gates or vulnerabilities that are opened as we speak in these areas. So in our designs, for example, we took into account that, so we built a chip that interface with the brain made of material that it accepts, and we prevent the security violations as well as preserve the privacy and individuality and the control of the device by the actual user, denying the access by anybody else other than the actual person that is hosting the wearable, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of touching on what Guillaume said with regards to Apple and confidentiality and such like. So a fantastic, very informative response there. I have one more last question for you, Newton. What is the main innovation, what for you is the main innovation over the last 10 years, and what do you think will be the next big breakthrough?
The last innovation over the last 10 years is being able to realize that the brain has another modality of communication within the opsin sites, within the sites that actually process light. So the modality of chemicals led to the revolution in pharmaceutical. The modality of understanding electrical or electrophysiology of the brain led to the revolution of EEG and TDCS and TMS and whatnot. The understanding that the brain has an optical layer would lead to another revolution of both understanding the brain as a machine that defies some of the laws of physics as we know it, and introduces quantum properties and qualities that has not been explored. And there lies the innovation for the next 20 to 30 years for introducing how do we compute around that. So to narrow it, laws and the problems happen primarily from the computing interface between these computing elements, being the neurons, the dendrites, the Puton sites on the dendrites. And to put this in perspective, you're talking one neuron that has 10,000 roughly of dendrite that have several thousand other the Puton sites, some of things which you cannot see it by your naked eye, but then you can sense within the quantum layer. So this is where there's going to be the innovation, and this is where going to be where the major risk, not an electrophysiological solution of the brain.
Thank you very much, Newton. Now my next question is for you, Anna. Edwin wants to know, in case I missed it, could this tool, your CAP, be used to study abnormal behavior such as mental health issues or psychopathic behavior?
Thank you. About psychopathic, I haven't seen a lot of evidence. So there is some evidence in depression, and we are running a trial with the FDA on mental health depression. I think that the technology is fairly new in the clinical side, so we'll have to just investigate pathology per pathology, right? So it's hard to say today. I think depression, there is a lot of evidence, but other mental health-related diseases, we don't yet know.
And I have another question for you. What type of additional research field could this tool be used, and not only in typical neurological disorders? Can it be a diagnostical tool as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think as Newton has mentioned, EEG has been out there for a long time. I think that what makes it different now is that computing capacities we have to process EEG on the digital area are different from 60 years ago, right? So I think that there may be some potential to develop biomarkers based on electrophysiology that we were not able to develop before. You know, could you wear this cap and be diagnosed with Alzheimer's or depression? I mean, that's a research question. So we don't yet know, but the combination, you know, there are new companies like Kernel combining FNIRS and MEG and EEG. So I think these non-invasive ways to look at the brain combined can provide, hopefully, some biomarkers. And then on the consumer side, of course, some of the things that Guillaume mentioned, for example, brain-computer interfaces. I love them for people that cannot communicate. We had a concert back in Barcelona where we got a cerebral palsy kid, a kid with cerebral palsy who couldn't communicate, to wear one of our caps. We sonify his brain, and then he played in an orchestra with a band. I mean, I think that, you know, I love the book by this French author, The Butterflies and the Diving Bell, right? You know, people locked in, people that don't have means to communicate. I think it's beautiful to use these kind of interfaces. But on healthy people, just to make us work harder and better, I don't like it that much.
So how can we take better care of our brains? I mean, I'm not saying, you know, yeah, just is it kind of general, you know, wellness? How can we take more care of our brains?
Well, if you look at, for example, Rudy Tanzi, right, who Newton may know from Alzheimer's in Boston, he has a saying called SHIELD, right, which is to take care of your brain in terms of, for example, Alzheimer's. You need to socialize, you need to learn something new, you need to sleep well, you need to eat well, you need to exercise, right? So there are certain things that have to do with having a healthy life, what you eat, how much you sleep, how much you exercise and socialize, that really have a tremendous impact on your brain. So, you know, what your mom told you always to eat vegetables and exercise and whatever, you know, all of these things our grandmas used to tell are still, you know, up to date.
She was right. My last question is for you, Stanley. Brain aging, it's from Susanna. Brain aging modeling is very interesting. Have you planned to qualify it from a regulatory point of view?
Thank you. Very, very interesting question. So, yes, what we are starting also trials, observational trials. So, in Switzerland and in France, we deploy what we call a decision support system. So the neurologist can enter the data of the patient and see the prediction of how the brain will change in 4 to 5 years, and to see how this can change the way we care for the patients. So yes, we are starting trials. FDA approval is longer down the road. We need to also better delineate the context of use for such tools to make very more accurate claims that can be later be approved by regulatory agencies.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all of our guests today, to Anna, to Newton, to Guillaume, and to Stanley for what's been an extremely fascinating exchange on tech in mind. Now, that was my final session of this show today. It was obviously amazing to discover also the innovations that you're working on. You know, thank you for coming and doing your demonstration with your cap. I'm sorry that Macron didn't put it on, but he did a great job convincing him yesterday. And thank you for your vision of future of healthcare as well. It's all very promising, and it's got me very energized, and I'm going to go home and I'm going to sleep and I'm going to eat my vegetables. Our next session on this stage is at 4 p.m. We'll be talking about tech for society and exploring technology's relationship with diversity and inclusion. So once again, thank you very much for following us live or here in the audience today at VivaTech Stage 3. We'll be back at 4 o'clock with Louise Eklund. Until then, thank you very much. Goodbye.